Hopefully sometimes this thing gives us trouble, but I think it's going to work good today because I tested it earlier. All right, hopefully sometimes. All right, everybody, welcome into our Gamecock Central Live on YouTube show. If you are just joining us, hang tight. As always, I've got to post the link to our front page just so everybody can actually see it on Gamecock Central. So if you're already on there, we're going to give people a second to get in just so they can watch us. And we're going to give the feed a second to load up here. And then I'm actually really excited about the show today, y'all. As you know, Chris and I have been doing these just very sort of just chatting Gamecocks football. And it's a lot of times been very lighthearted, just talking about everything with the season and talking a little recruiting. But today we've got a very special guest for the first time. So excited about that. Like I said, if y'all will give me 20 seconds here, I've got to post this on Facebook as well. And then we'll be good to go, everybody. All right, cool. All right, again, what's up? Welcome. Thank you guys for joining us again. We are live on our Gamecock Central YouTube and on GamecockCentral.com front page and on our message boards. I'm Wes Mitchell. He is Chris Clark. And today, for the first time on our live show, we actually have a very special guest, a good friend of mine, and someone who I think can bring some just excellent background knowledge and help inform all of us, and someone who I think it's great that he's also willing to speak to us and answer some questions and give us some firsthand knowledge on everything that's going on in the country today. Former Gamecock. Also, he's an author, and he spent a lot of time in our schools, which I think is important and gives some important information there as well. It is former Gamecock Preston Thorne. Preston, thanks for being on, man. Glad to have you on. How you doing?
Man, obviously with everything that's happening and right now, as far as the country is concerned, I mean, first and foremost, COVID, which we as a country were struggling to get through. And then with the recent deaths of George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, this is definitely a turbulent time, and it's a trying time. But, aside from all of those things, me personally, I'm doing as best as I can, and I'm doing fairly well for right now.
Yeah, and again, man, I thank you for joining us, and I thank you for being willing to educate us on some of what's going on, because I as we have all sort of looked in the mirror with everything going on, which I think is a very important part of it. One thing, because we can all learn more about ourselves, and we can all learn more about our friends, our neighbors, our brothers, our sisters, and I think it's an important time for us to sort of look in the mirror and maybe confront, maybe we do personally have biases that we don't even maybe acknowledge if you don't really look in the mirror and dig deep and do those things. And I've sort of been, I think, introduced to the idea of being anti-racist as opposed to just being someone who's not racist or doesn't see themselves as racist. And I think something we've maybe learned, Preston, is that, and we already knew this, but I think now more than ever, some people maybe say, well, sports are just sports, and sports are for fun. Sports as a hobby, it's a game. But I think sports, it's proved again, sports is an important way for us all to not only come together, but then also maybe educate ourselves and learn more about what our fellow friends in society go through on a day-to-day basis. So that's sort of maybe where I would like to start, if it's cool with you. Where do you see sports and everything from a locker room, and the fact that a locker room has guys from every single walk of life coming together for one purpose, but then also the way that sports can deliver a message to a fan base of, hey, this guy I cheer for on Saturday or Sunday is a human being who goes through things in life that maybe we all need to take a second and acknowledge and have empathy and sort of learn more about these athletes as people.
Yeah, I mean, I think you said a lot of great things just now, and even just to go back to the beginning, the idea of anti-racism is sort of a new idea that's sort of been filtering down from the academy. Dr. Ibram X. Kendi, he wrote a really great book on how to be an anti-racist, and I sort of think about things in a sports way. I use sports metaphors to kind of help me make sense of the world, and so the way I would welcome our listeners and our readers and our subscribers to think about the difference between being racist and anti-racist is the difference between playing to win or playing not to lose. And we see that sometimes when we see, we'll see our favorite teams when there's an opportunity for us to, maybe go for it on fourth down, or why do we play so safe just now? That's kind of being not racist. Like you're not saying anything. You're personally not racist, but you're not taking the, the risk or the chances to, improve. When we talk about playing to win, in a football sense, it might mean throwing the ball on first down. It might mean going for it on fourth down when you're backed up or something along those lines. It may be, being a little bit more aggressive. And that's sort of the same thing about what anti-racism is, when you see something, you say something, or when you feel something that's not right, you stand up for it. And what people kind of aren't explicitly saying that, a lot of times we say that it's easy to do the right thing, but it's not all the time. And so that idea of being anti-racist, it takes courage, because it's a lot easier to play it safe, play not to lose. But anti-racist, I would say, is playing to win. And that's sort of a distinction that if you can sort of get in your mind between, playing not to lose or playing to win, and think about it in those terms of racism and anti-racism, I think that's a way to sort of move forward for sure.
So you used the word courage. I saw your tweet from earlier today. I'm going to try to pull it up real quick when we're talking about coaches and their role in helping us move forward as a society, and not just being there for their players. I think we've all had a coach over the years that's really taking on much more of a role than just a coach, and maybe
100%.
As a father figure in your life, as a mentor, as a leader. And I think one thing, not to get remotely political, but I think one thing our country does need is more and better leadership. And when there's a need for that, then that's when people have to step up into those roles. And so my question for you is, where do you sort of see the roles for, and it's not just college coaches. I know they're sort of on the forefront. College coaches are essentially celebrities these days, man. But
right.
All the way down to high school coaches to Pop Warner football, what do you sort of see as the role for coaches, and what can coaches do to sort of be there, but to actually listen to their players and use their platform to denounce racism and sort of back to that same thing, not just being not a racist, but sort of being anti-racist and really being there for their players.
Yeah. Coaching is sort of a calling, and it's a platform that a lot of coaches, take very, very seriously. And, like you said, we've all been, let me speak for myself personally. I've been really fortunate to have a lot of really, really great coaches in my life. Black men, white men, along the lines, they took interest in me. And they served as mentors when I wasn't trying to listen to my father, because he was telling me things, and my coach would say the same thing, and all of a sudden sometimes my father made a little more sense, and so we know coaches have a huge role, and that's why I said that earlier, because coaches know that you have to coach something in order for it to happen. And so kind of one of the, it's not a myth, but kind of the maybe a not quite truth is that sports teaches a bunch of lessons, and it can, but coaches have to be intentional about teaching those lessons. So a lot of you probably think about when you were playing, some of the great lessons you learned about teamwork or any of those types of things were because a coach explicitly taught that lesson some way. He got your attention some way during practice that you learned that. So it's not that you just learn it through osmosis or anything like that. The coach has to be intentional about what they're teaching. And again, when it comes to these conversations that are, we tell our players all the time, you got to get comfortable being uncomfortable. That's kind of a trope that we throw out a lot. Well, conversations about race are uncomfortable. Conversations about sex are uncomfortable. Conversations about violence, these things are not comfortable to have. But I've seen coaches sort of had a lot of these conversations when it comes to, the way to conduct yourself properly as a man, and these are types of things. I've seen them have these kinds of conversations, and now they just have to summon the courage to have these conversations with their teams, because coaches have a huge platform. Everybody that's played sports can think right now of some phrase or some term or some words, or even imitate a coach that you used to have. So coaches play a huge role in our lives. And, we could just imagine a world where there was a coach that was standing in front of his team and preaching, anti-racism, preaching and telling his teammates about, the ideas of freedom, justice, and equality, and all of these things for all folks, and being very explicit about what they were teaching. So yeah, sports is one of the few places where we definitely know that we have people's attention. We have young folks' attention from the ages of, whatever age, you have their attention as a coach. And then, so this is sort of your responsibility to take the next step. And a lot of coaches know that. They know that, and they use their platform for good, but it's just time to take it up to another level.
Preston, I wanted to ask you, so Wes asked you about the coaching side, and I want to ask you about the player side of things. And, you've been in a locker room, obviously, with lots of different personalities and backgrounds. And so one of the things that, I think we've seen in the past, few weeks, definitely in the past couple of days, is we've seen words, come out on social media, or things that have been said, printed, whatever, by players that have caused, some hurt, or some division, some confusion, all these things. So I guess my question is, relying on your background as a player, just, and connecting with some of these young people now, what can people in a locker room, all of them as a collective, do to come together on an issue like this? Because in a locker room, you're going to have different religions, you're going to have different races, different, socioeconomic backgrounds. So what can players do? And I would be curious right now, especially, what can players who are not Black do, in particular, to help and to educate themselves and to help?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. In the locker room, obviously being in locker rooms, you'd be amazed at the conversations that happen in locker rooms, and especially as I've heard from my friends who played in the NFL and MLB. Obviously as they get older, these conversations become a little bit more heated and a little bit more nuanced and everything, because everybody's grown up as men. But at a young point, especially for non-white, non-Black or white players or things like that, maybe the conversation is just to listen, just to listen to what some folks are saying. Because when you listen, what you'll hear is you'll quickly find out, as I'm sure y'all know, you'll find out that it's not that simple, because Black people aren't a monolith, So you'll hear somebody having one side of a conversation, you hear somebody having another kind of side of a conversation, and you'll hear these two folks who agree on, anti-racism. They may disagree on the method towards or how to achieve those things. And so sometimes you might just sit back and listen. You'd be like, oh wow, okay. So there's these differing opinions happening, and that's just something to take in. So when you think, okay, I understand that that different people have different opinions, and there's various ways to go about it. And when I would say maybe vet an opinion that you have. If you have a teammate that you have, and you might want to say, hey man, let me run this by you real quick. What do you think about this? And if somebody's like, have you thought about this, son? Or maybe you didn't think about that. Then, maybe you might see like where the disconnect may be. Or, things of that nature. If you feel really strongly, you might be able to explain to folks why you feel that strongly. And those conversations we've had could be had. So But yeah, locker rooms are special places because it's uh it's there's probably no other places in life where there's going to be that much of a mix of people across any. We know when we talk about diversity, we kind of just usually just use the term diversity in terms of race, but locker rooms are diverse as far as every, like you said, every sort of form, and you'll hear those opinions coming out because you spend so much time. So I think especially my white brothers, you kind of have a I won't say an advantage, but you definitely have a viewpoint that a lot of maybe your white friends or your white colleagues, partners don't get necessarily to get because they don't a lot of chance get the unfiltered opinions of Black folks. So it's just kind of an opportunity to take advantage, listen, and just sort of be there from that angle.
Preston, I know you've been able to travel around, obviously with the book and now the sequel, and y'all have had really a sort of distinct opportunity to speak to kids all around our state. I think as far as really any issue when we're trying to move forward, it seems like, I mean, we've all seen it. The older people, older generations were raised a certain way with certain things, sort of, I guess their expectations of how things are. And sometimes it's more difficult to maybe create change. And then you hope as generations move forward that the next generation is more understanding, is more open to, their fellow person's thoughts and what they go through in their life. So what I'm trying to get at is, how do you sort of see our young people that maybe don't have some of the built-in prejudices already sort of built in their lives potentially? Do you sort of see the young people maybe having a little more, I don't know if the word's empathy, or just do young people even really see race in their fellow classmates the way maybe it was 60, 70 years ago, is I guess what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, that's a great question. One of the things when I talk with my stepfather, who's 78, I believe 76 or 78, one of his big things was that the disappointing thing to him was that there were still younger generations that were having this conversation. I guess there was always of the hope that these types of things would eventually die off and things like that. But again, that's sort of like non-racist thinking. We just hope that it dies off. Whereas anti-racists would be like, we're going to kill this thing. This is not going to happen anymore. So, with younger kids, obviously, you have your friend, you have your partner that you play basketball with, or kickball, or whatever. So you see all of that in elementary schools, and the question really gets sort of answered as to, when do those things change? When do those things happen? Because our kids are only raised, they're only doing what they're raised to do, and so that just goes back to the parents. And when do they start to, maybe not even consciously, maybe it's not even a conscious thing, but maybe you start to put out signals, and your children. We always say that our children may not listen to us, but they're always watching us. So if you if you are crossing the street when a Black man's walking down the street, you may not say anything about that, but your child might notice. Or if you are if you're hesitant to do any of those types of social activities with somebody, they'll start to notice those things, that maybe, and then they start to pick up on them. So yeah, at the early ages, you don't see it as much, but they're very much keenly aware of what society's expectations are for those things. So again, it just goes back to parents being actively anti-racist about curing these things, and about approaching these things when they may see them. Because one of the kind of ways that a lot of white parents sort of try to be non-racist is like, the kind of the phrase like, I don't see color, or we don't see color, and that's a good intention, but it kind of denies the fact that obviously I'm black, y'all are white. Okay, cool. There's no problems with that. You know, when I look at myself and I see somebody black, I don't see a problem. And that's fine. You can look at me, you can see a black man and not see a problem either. There's no problems with that. So I guess what a lot of people say when they don't see color, what they mean to say is that I don't discriminate on people based on what color they are, right? But it's a lot of easier way. So, you know, you can have your children and address it like, oh yeah, obviously Mr. Preston is a black man, no problem. But he still comes to our house. He still hangs out with my dad, and they drink beers and watch the Gamecocks or whatever. It's not it's not a big issue.
Yeah, and that's always kind of been the idea of I don't see color has always sort of just been, I mean, it's BS basically. I think it's more about, let's acknowledge that, hey, we may look different. We may have come from different backgrounds. We have different experiences, and we can acknowledge those things without, it affecting how we feel about the person. I think is the point.
Absolutely.
Again, joined by Preston Thorne here on Gamecock Central Live. Chris, you got anything you want to hop in with right now?
It was maybe sort of a comment, sort of a question. I'm not really even sure, but just something I wanted to say. And Preston, maybe you got some just thoughts on it. But, one thing I was thinking about, something that honestly I'm thankful for, because I do think, to go back to what Wes said, if we grew up 50 years ago, whatever, I mean, we can talk to some older generation people right now. And like Wes said, they grew up in a different way. Right. And so, and a lot of that stuff was not acceptable then or now, but, different. And so I'm always been thankful that the environment that I grew up in, I went to an elementary school in which, I was actually a minority, actually, in terms of just race. I went to school with more African American kids in elementary school, 1st through 5th grade. And also my parents, I never had to grow up in a home where I heard, a racial slur, for example. I heard it a lot. I grew up in South Carolina. It is what
Right.
it is,
Right.
It's not right, but it is what it is. And so
Right.
when I went to some of my friends' houses when I was in elementary school or even beyond, I hate to say it, but I heard that stuff, or I would sometimes hear it at school or whatever it may be. But I think honestly that helped me. And so what you said about parents, I've got a 4-year-old daughter and a 5-year-old daughter. And so that hit home with me that it's really important for me as a dad, to play an active role in going ahead and setting the bar, and setting that example, because it helped me growing up to have that base of, there wasn't as much, I couldn't say that we had a bunch of like lessons on, hey, this is why you can't be a racist, et cetera.
Right.
There weren't a lot of anti-racism things, but I never actively heard it. And that honestly really, really helped me with my outlook. So I'm right with you with the parent thing, and it really hit home for me.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because eventually we end up repeating our parents, and we end up sort of, I'm sure you found yourself now, you say stuff to your daughters, you're like, man, I sound just like I can't believe I just said that.
Yes.
Yes. And
it's bad.
So it's crazy how that ends up happening.
Yeah.
So, that all those things are sort of baked into us at an early age. And if we can just be a little bit more intentional about, where we are with those things, the hope is in the future for sure.
Preston, I don't want to take too much the attention away from our primary discussion, but I do want to talk a little bit about COVID and the fact that, hey, the players are most of them, if not all of them, are back on campus now, moving back in. I was watching on social media, they're going through their COVID tests, whether which is not fun from what I've seen and heard. What would your mindset be like if you were a player coming back right now amidst this? Now, I do think from everything I've seen, the protocols they have in place, you may be safer right now as a player, just because not everybody is getting tested right now, whereas all the players are, and they're going to be monitored. Everything's going to be cleaned down. But what would your mindset be right now? Just sort of it's a weird time as far as the virus is, and I would say unprecedented times in that nobody has really ever gone through something like this.
Yeah, this is a wild time. I mean, my first thought if I was a player, I would be like, I would hate it just because I always hated coming back for summer workouts to start with. So, it's always like, oh man, we gotta we gotta come back. All right. So I mean, that would be my first thought. But I don't think I mean, again, you're young, you kind of almost feel invincible. So I mean, you would be come back. I don't think you would be too much focused on the getting sick or the effects of COVID or anything. Is obviously, like you said, you see all the precautions that they're taking, and they definitely need to be commended for that. I would just wonder, how you would maybe how you would feel if you got if you once you leave campus, are you going home to your grandmother's house, or are you going back to elderly relatives, or your parents may be high risk or something and things like that. So that might be something that you would think about, or something that would maybe concern you. But I think for the players personally, you just be like, man, all right, it's time to get back to work, time to get out of mama's house. You've been cooped up in under your parents' roof for these last 12 weeks or whatever. I mean, as a 21-year-old, you'd definitely be ready to get out and be on your own for sure.
Well, and I think just statistically, as widespread as we now know the virus is, I mean, we've already seen, I guess Alabama had 5 guys, Oklahoma State had some guys. If you take 100 people in the population and bring them back and say, hey, we're going to test you all, I would dare say probably every school in the country is going to have somebody that has either had it or has it at the time, has been exposed to it. So, I think those numbers are going to maybe be a little bit scary, and people are going to say, well, is it too early? Should we be doing this? But I think that's just statistically that there's going to be probably asymptomatic kids that have come back and realize I had it and I didn't even know it. But I do think you make an interesting point. A lot, if you're a football player, you put so much of your time, energy, effort year round just about to get ready to play those like 12, 13, 14, 15 if you're lucky games. A lot of just the kids that I know, family members of theirs, a lot of them, Preston, are just like dying to just get back around their teammates and sort of get that camaraderie back. And I mean, I don't want to speak for all of them, but I just get the impression that they're not really thinking about, fear of the virus. It's just more like I've missed being around my guys almost.
Yeah, I mean, I could definitely see that. Like I said, man, you think about if you're a college sophomore and you've been used to having your own room, dorm room and everything like that, and you got to go back home and wash dishes and take out the trash and all kind of foolishness like that. You're like, man, get me out of here. You don't want to be a part of that. Obviously you love your parents, but everybody loves independence a little bit more. And that's where the provisions come in. Having all the safety provisions, because it's up to the adults to make sure that the students are being safe, because left up to their own devices, I wouldn't trust 21-year-olds with much of anything. So it's got to make sure that we, keep everything in the reins. And I think they're going to do a pretty good job of that.
Well, the hardest part about this is going to be that little line that says we're encouraging our players not to hang out with people who are not on the team. That part seems impossible.
Yeah, that's tough. That's gonna be a tough one.
You've got to be realistic.
Yeah.
So
I imagine you have to say that, and you strongly encourage it, but that's gonna be a battle that you probably won't win.
Exactly. Well, man, we won't take up any more of your time, but Preston, man, I really appreciate, as you said, this it can be a difficult conversation from time to time. I don't feel like it was a difficult conversation with us here today, but I think it's a great conversation for us to have, and I appreciate you being willing, to answer questions for us and to help, because I think that's what it's about. It's about educating those around us and educating our fellow men just about, hey, this is what we go through as human beings on a day-to-day basis. It really hit me talking to a couple of my friends, and they said, hey, ask a friend of yours who's Black if they have a cop story. and they said, everybody I know in their circle has a cop story. And it really hit me. I said, the extent of my concern with the cops growing up was, were they going to break up our party,
Yeah.
for drinking underage? Sorry,
Right.
mom. I mean, just being real, like trying to look in the mirror about it. I mean, I've been pulled over for speeding, never had to feel actually scared, in that situation. And one of my friends said, hey, I've got a daughter and a son who've just gotten their driver's license, and talked about the actual fear of putting, their daughter and son behind the wheel, and sort of the interaction with the cop. And again, I know cops who are good people. I'm not saying that at all, but just about the chance of running into the wrong person who should have never been a cop in the first place, and someone who's empowered by the system that is in place around police, that there's very true fear, that is at play here. And I thought that was important for me to hear, but maybe important for other people to hear, is that you shouldn't have to be scared to be pulled over by the person that is supposed to be there to protect you. So I thought that was important to say that I think there's two things at play. There's a lot of things at play here, but at least my feeling is, yes, we need anti-racism on everything. But as far as the specific matter of police brutality, I think in some ways, it even goes beyond racism. I think it's more about the structure of how we structure our policing system, and what changes we can make, what reforms we can make, to make it to where those interactions are safer, and that fear is not involved with them.
Yeah, I mean, and that's hugely important because as you're speaking, a lot of things resonate me. I have a cop story, and that's that you live with it. That's part of something that, unfortunately, that you almost kind of accept. But as I'm thinking about, especially our young men that are playing this game, our young men, our young women that are playing these games that we love to watch them, you know, if somebody's already on edge because you're black, and then you happen to be 6'3", 280 pounds, they might be on the more defensive. And y'all talked to these dudes before. Some of these dudes wouldn't hurt a fly. You talk to them, be like, you sure you play football? And but you would never get that. So a lot of times, a lot of our athletes are maybe even at more of a higher risk because of that level of fear, and biases, sort of kick in when when they might be pulled over. So yeah, the system of policing, it does have an inherent issue, which obviously deals with the concept of biases and things like that. And when do people feel threatened versus when they don't? And like we said, we understand that policing is a very tough job. It's a hard job, and that's why I think that there's maybe the outcry, because we expect these folks who are in these positions of authority, when you have a kind of a respect for a position or an office, you expect that position to sort of to act with the respect that they've been sort of granted, or the deference that they're granted. And and that sort of thing. For me, it's even personally for me, my father was a police officer, and he was a police officer, and we had to have the same conversations. And those conversations about when you first started driving, it's like, look, these are the things that you need to try to do to attempt to de-escalate situations, or to make your intentions clear. Which, like you said, those are not conversations that everybody has to have. So it's definitely the system of policing, of who we police. And like you said, when you want those people to be on call when we to serve and protect you, not to be policing you. You want to be able to call them when you feel the need, when you need protection.
Yeah, and there's if people want to read more, I've seen there's actually a lot of material out there right now about everything we've talked about, but specifically about potential reform to the system policing. I think it starts honestly with more and better oversight, with better training, and a better, I believe, filter for who we're actually giving these jobs to, which is never going to be a perfect system, but I think that's what we have to try to strive for. So Preston, again, man, I appreciate you being willing to have the conversation with us, to share with us your experiences, and to give us some insight. I love you, man, and I appreciate it. And we'll talk to you soon. Okay, man. Is there anything else you want to add before we let you go?
No, like I said, I think the first thing is just that, that the idea of playing to win. Let's play to win this thing, and get aggressive with it. Get aggressive with it, whether it's educating yourself, talking to family members, because as you get better, we get better. Everybody gets better at the same time, and it can only make this thing. The last thing I guess I would leave with is that one of the sort of tropes is that we're more divided than we've ever been as a nation, and I don't know if that's true. I would just challenge that, because what I've seen and what you see more people who are wanting to fight for the sides of right and the side of freedom, justice, and equality. You see more people who are willing to come out and have conversations and do these types of things. So, I would just challenge this idea that we're more divided than we ever are. I think that we definitely have an opportunity to come together right now, but it's not going to happen just by happening. It's going to happen through our works, and all these things add up.
Definitely, man. Definitely good stuff. Hey, where can we buy the book, by the way? Is it
in Columbia,
everywhere?
Mass General. Yeah, it's pretty much your retailers in Columbia, Mass General, or you can go to our website at athletesandartists.com. You can go there and check out our book. If you have nothing else to do, if you want to get away from the news, we also did a podcast on the 2004 fight, which that can give you about a 5 or 6 hour escape from what's going on. And so whatever, man, like I said, I really appreciate the opportunity to have these conversations, for sure.
No, we appreciate you, man. And
Thanks,
are you doing your running today? I saw you
we're doing walking today, sir. not running. We're gonna be walking today.
I got you, man. All right, dude. Well, hey, I'll talk to you soon. Okay, Preston. Thanks again, man.
Yes, sir. Chris,
Thanks,
pleasure to meet you, man. Good to see
Good
you.
to
We gotta
see you,
meet up in
man.
person.
All right. Yeah, you too, man.
Definitely.
All right.
Definitely.
Be good.
Yep. Great stuff there from Preston. We appreciate him joining us. And not that Chris, not that there's any like segue from everything we were talking about. Obviously important, deep conversation there. And we do appreciate Preston being willing to, to share with us and give us important perspective there. Cause I do think, man, it's important with our platform. You and I interview kids every single day. A large percentage of them, are from the Black community. And a lot of times they really open up their lives to us. And I know we have friendships that we've built, they're lifelong friendships through what we're able to do through our jobs. So I think it's important with our platform for us to help people understand a little bit more about what these athletes, the young athletes we're talking to, go through on a day-to-day basis, and then understand, what this movement is all about. And I think Preston did a really good job of sharing that with us today.
Absolutely, man. I mean, he has I think he's got a really unique perspective because, he is a former athlete and he's an educator. And so he's got a lot of he's got a big base of knowledge, where he can talk about these things in addition to being an African-American himself. And, one thing I think, Wes, that I've seen, a little bit of a soapbox here. And, I think maybe we've all fallen into this a little bit, is not that, you and I, we're not big like social media, like debater type people, politics, all that type of stuff. We sort of stay out of that. But one thing I've seen a lot is, with a lot of the stuff that's been happening in the country, you get a lot of people who are coming along and saying, well, actually this and that. And I think what Preston said about listening and just trying to understand how other people who are not you, no matter skin color or socioeconomic background or whatever, but how other people feel, and having, empathy is a word we've thrown around a lot, and just having more of that. Do you have to agree from the outset? No, but just take some time to listen instead of trying to score political points or trying to win a debate or whatever it may be. If you want to bring some facts to the table, that's great, but do it in a way that shows empathy. And above all, right now, I think it's important that we all listen, and that when we have conversations, that they're productive. I think we just had a really productive conversation, and probably all three of us that were sitting there learned something, and came away, felt like we had a productive conversation. And I can speak for myself. I certainly learned. And so I think that's what it's all about, rather than just, sending, you know, political memes back and forth, or trying to fact check each other, whatever it may be. I think it's just important to show empathy and come together and try to talk about these issues, and have good productive conversations.
Yeah, and just to understand that hey, these things aren't made up. Like when our friends who are Black tell us that they deal with these issues on a day-to-day basis, that they're treated differently. These aren't made up. These are real things that really happen. And I think the big thing is, like I was talking about, the idea of being anti-racist. The big thing that has stood out to me is that it's not really on the Black community to change things. Like, it's on the people who create these issues. And I'm not saying every single issue between a white person and a Black person is racially driven, but there are systematic issues as far as how things are done in our country that we have to continue to move forward, and that we have to work together to change. And I think, like you said, I certainly hope that for anybody listening, and I hope for Preston, I hope it was a productive conversation, because I know personally, like you said, I couldn't say it better. I think it was a very productive conversation, and the conversations that we have to have, frankly, if we're going to move forward. So, like I said, there's really no current, there's no segue from a very real. It involves sports, but it's at its root is not a sports conversation necessarily. There's no real segue from that, but I do want to get to just some of the latest news in South Carolina sports, and that being that Ray Tanner spoke to the Board of Trustees today for a quick update. Chris, I guess I should probably even use the word news lightly. There was not a lot coming from it, but I would say just increased optimism. That was the word Ray Tanner used, in the number of fans in the stands, this fall. And by the way, just complete transparency here. If y'all saw me jump down for a second before Chris started talking, a bug jumped on me right in the middle of the conversation a second ago. And it kind of scared the crap out of me, to be honest with you, because I didn't know what was on me. But anyway, Chris, I mean, the fact that he's more optimistic, what numbers were we talking about before? 15 to 20,000?
Yeah.
Maybe?
Yeah. 15 to 20.
Does that, if he's more optimistic, does that mean that number could potentially be higher, you think?
That's the impression I got. And, we haven't had a ton of time since Ray hopped off that call. What was that, about 2 hours or so ago from when we're doing this live? But, I sent out a few messages since then, trying to put out some feelers of what exactly that meant. And I think to sort of give my opinion and sort of answer the question, yeah, it sounds like there is now a school of thought that they might be able to increase that number. Now, there is still ways to go, and that's what Tanner said. For me, did that mean, and they've run models, from Tanner said, they've run models, everything from absolutely no games to games with full stadiums and everything in between. The full stadium approach, doesn't seem as likely right now. And I don't think necessarily that's what Tanner meant, but can we get more fans in the seats? I think that's possible. Now, what does that mean? Does it mean a half full stadium? Does it mean 5,000 more than what they were originally thinking? I don't really know. I do know this, high school football is going to have fans in the stands, and probably as many as possible, because that's their entire base of revenue. When you look at like SCISA, private school ball in South Carolina, they're typically more spread out anyway. I was talking to the SCISA athletic director, Mike Fanning, about that actually yesterday on Thursday. I got a chance to interview him, and he said, look, we don't have as many people in the stands anyways, and ours are typically really spread out. And I haven't been to some SCISA games. I can say that's true. So they're not as concerned about that aspect. For South Carolina or SEC stadiums, obviously they're always dealing with packed crowds. So are they going to be able to distance? Do we go more towards a model where they're not as worried about distancing, where they basically just tell people, hey, do it at your own risk? Maybe. I mean, we're seeing, Wes, there are a lot of questions about Disney. Disney's reopening. Now they'll have some protocols in place for sure. But some companies are moving a bit more towards, or organizations, not necessarily companies, moving a little bit more towards this sort of, consent of, hey, assumed risk. When you walk in somewhere that's a public place, there's going to be a risk, and so they were, the universities and the NCAA, the conferences, they were already going to have to deal with liability. But do you just sort of piggyback off that and say, look, if we're going to let 50,000 people in, but you got to know you may walk out of here with COVID or whatever, or the flu or whatever it may be. Maybe so. But that was all a long-winded way of saying I really don't have a great sense of the numbers, but there is, just doing some checking after Tanner spoke, there is a little bit more of a process now that they may be able to let in, or there's a thought process rather, they may be able to let in more fans.
Yeah, and we actually have a little bit of actual news now, Chris. I'm looking on Twitter right now. I don't know who had this first or if this is elsewhere as well, but Joseph Cranny, who is actually, I'm looking, the Post and Courier's projects reporter, he has video of Will Muschamp, and I don't know if it's the entire football team, but the video is a huge group of South Carolina football players that are marching right now from downtown Columbia to the governor's mansion, and has a quote from Muschamp that says, "We're marching for racial equality." If anybody wants to see that, I just retweeted it on my account. But a big group, there's Muschamp, Carol, his wife. I think everybody has masks on as well. I think that's T-Rob with them. Someone else walking up front, and then just let's see, I see Vershawn Lee, Jazz Turnetine, just a huge group of players.
Carol Muschamp. Did you already say Carol? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I did.
Okay.
So,
I was like trying to pick everybody. I did it again, Wes. I'm sorry. I did it.
You don't actually listen to
I'll always ignore you. I'm sorry.
But yeah, so a great sign of unity there. That's something, I think that we thought was maybe a possibility, but the video right there, again, from Joseph Cranny, of the staff and players, and it looks, Chris, from the video, it looks like I said, I don't want to say it's the entire team. I know some of the freshmen are actually back home now for graduation at their high schools, but a huge group of players and staff marching right now.
Yeah, I saw George Wynn heading it up. Like you said, T-Rob and Will Muschamp, and there's Vershawn Lee going by. Man, Jay Urich. There's a lot of them. That may be close to the whole group, as far as who all's on campus,
Yeah.
So that's a large group.
That's a great scene there. Yeah. And the fact is, I'm curious to hear from Will Muschamp on Monday as well. He's going to speak during a teleconference, and obviously, I believe we'll address some of what's going on in the world right now and what his plans are. The team is just now getting back this week, but what his plans are to do some things like Preston was talking about, to sort of directly address everything, going on in the world right now. And I think that is one thing, you can say whatever you want about the on the field product and the wins and losses this past season. You say whatever you want, but I do think as far as empowering people around him, and I'm talking about Will Muschamp, having Marcus Lattimore and then now Connor Shaw in a position to bring in, they do a great job of bringing in speakers who can help educate the guys and listen to the guys about a number of different topics. And I'll be curious to hear Muschamp on Monday talk about this and talk about what they're going to be doing as a team to sort of directly address everything.
And Muschamp has really been, I think he talks about issues like, not necessarily the issues that have come up recently as much, which I'm sure he'll hit on Monday, and he's hit on it some already, but he's talked a lot about diversity. I mean, I remember at the Charleston Spurs Up tour a couple years ago, he talked about the city of Columbia, just how diverse it is and the culture. Muschamp has had at one time when Brian McClendon and Javaris Robinson was on staff, I think there were 65 Power 5, programs at the time, and was the only one that had 2 African-American coordinators as offensive and defensive coordinators. A lot of people in positions of power within the football program in the university. You look at someone like Maria Hickman, for example, who are African-American. And so I think this shows, that Will Muschamp, who's a guy that's really beloved by his players of all different backgrounds, we've seen plenty of evidence of that in the past, that he understands that and connects with his players and connects with their feelings and cares about those issues. And here he is, heading up a march that I'm sure is very important to, looks like, just about all the team there.
Yeah, definitely. And we'll try to get more on that on Gamecock Central. I think it's 1:56, so we've about hit our normal hour anyway. I think, Chris, probably a good time for us to hop off here, maybe help get some coverage for that, and continue our coverage on Gamecock Central. So for Chris, I'm Wes. Again, thanks to Preston for joining us. I hope and think it was a productive conversation today, and I hope that you do as well. So if you have questions about everything, comments, of course, join us on GamecockCentral.com and hit the subscribe button here on our Gamecock Central YouTube. As always, we appreciate it, and we'll catch y'all next time.